Welcome into Film Tank, the weekly podcast that covers both new and classic cinema. On this episode of Film Tank, we talk about the second film in the new Star Trek generation, which is Star Trek Into Darkness. If you would like to get in touch with Film Tank, you can always email us at filmtankshow@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Film Tank Show. And you can listen to all of our episodes on our website, filmtankshow.com, or on iTunes. And now, here are your hosts, Nick Cheney, Toussaint Egan, and myself, Alex Diekman. Hello there again, everyone, and welcome in to episode 195 of Film Tank. As always, Alex Diekman with you, along with Nick Cheney.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
You caught up with us there.
Sure did. Had to reboot.
Yeah?
Yep.
Does that happen often?
Only when I have to fart.
Very well. Also joining us on this wonderful episode is Toussaint Egan.
Happy to be aboard, Captain.
Thank you. Whatever your title is.
This is the USS Film Tank.
USS Film Tank.
I am very proud to be
submarine. Oh, boy.
On the ship.
See?
Okay.
Wow, okay.
Okay. Today, on this particular episode, I will say, as I sometimes do, am the one who forced everybody to do an episode on this.
Yay!
Mostly because I wanted to talk about what is pretty unanimously the most divisive film in the new Star Trek era.
Divisive implies that there's a large subsection of people on both sides.
Okay.
I'm just saying divisive.
You're like Mal Reynolds from Firefly. It was just like, oh, I was on the losing side. Still not sure if I was on the wrong one.
Okay.
No, I just meant divisive usually is like... never mind.
I don't know. I will say this. Over the years on this podcast, in the very few times Star Trek has come up, there's been a negative opinion about this film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this is actually quite a good film. So
What film are we talking about?
the one I just referenced, which is
okay.
Star Trek Into Darkness.
Thank you.
I don't think you had said the title, so I think
Oh, had I?
You said the second.
Okay. Okay. Well,
I'm going to give you both points.
I appreciate the effort,
Thank you.
nevertheless.
I'm going to win the House Cup.
Good luck with you on the House Cup.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
unless you're in Gryffindor, you don't got a snowball's chance in a very warm place.
Probably not.
Yeah.
He probably also would not be allowed to put his name in the cup.
Yeah. So. Good thing I am a Hufflepuff. No, I'm not.
I don't know if I'm more embarrassed that you made that declaration or that you walked it back.
I can't remember the fucking houses. I just remember Gryffindor. I remember Slytherin. I remember Hufflepuff, and
Okay.
I can't remember the last one.
Ravenclaw.
So that's a majority. To say you can't remember the houses, but you can remember all but one.
I can't remember the last one.
Ravenclaw.
Yeah,
Ravenclaw. What the hell do they do?
they're purple.
Are they smart?
What the hell do they do?
Are they
They're
smart?
purple.
Are they?
They are cunning and. Well, I'm just trying to. Listen, I've been told that I'm a Ravenclaw.
Okay, cool.
In the films, at least, and I have not read anything except for the final book.
I love
That's
this.
where they put the Asian people. Because Cho Chang is in there.
Unfortunately.
Are you talking about the Goblet of Fire?
No.
What? That's an inanimate object.
I'm talking about the fucking installment of Harry Potter, which we were also talking about
No,
in this
no,
episode.
no.
No, we're not.
I was talking about that really comes to the forefront in the 5th installment with the club that they
Order of the Phoenix.
Yes. Anyway,
Anyway,
That's actually the Order of the Phoenix is the 5th. Goblet of Fire is the 4th. Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
have you ever done a Harry Potter episode?
no.
No.
Well, unless you count Fantastic Beasts.
Oh, we don't. We don't do that.
I'm still a fan of that film.
I know.
Anyways, what I will say in the Harry Potter films, Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff are basically just there because they wanted to have 4 instead of 2.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I actually, yeah. I mean, in the books and in the movies, and although I will say I feel like Hufflepuff is the
nice people.
No, well, I mean, maybe, I don't know. I'm saying they're the ones who's most relegated to the background, because at least I can name one person who was in Ravenclaw, whereas, and I know there are a bunch of Harry Potter nerds that if they were listening, they would probably be screaming at their microphones if they were trying to talk back to this one-way audio recording.
Which they probably will,
because we have very passionate but dumb fans.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Nice. Good shaming. Yeah. Nice. Shaming our very small group of listeners.
We love them.
Yes, apparently.
What can I say?
Well, Luna is in Hufflepuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, is she?
I don't know.
I think so, yeah.
I just always thought she was in Gryffindor.
No. At least in the films, I actually think she's in Ravenclaw.
I think she might
that
be.
Makes sense.
Because she's got the whole thing about knowing about the diadem or something. That is one of the
I'm going to Google
Horcruxes, and she knows the story.
Yes,
and that's
please.
how
Google more Harry Potter lore on our Star Trek episode.
That's how Harry Potter finds the diadem, because she leads her to whatever her name was. So, yeah, we're really... Boy,
we're coming strong out the gate.
If there are passionate Harry Potter listeners right now, they are probably just...
So Newt Scamander is a Hufflepuff.
Oh.
How about that,
Yeah,
folks?
I guess that
Also,
makes sense.
Cedric Diggory is probably the most, I could say, recognizable name. Which would make sense, because he was in the Goblet of Fire, and obviously he can't be in Gryffindor, or... I don't remember who are the other...
Or he can't compete against Harry Potter, and he becomes...
Wait a minute.
No.
That wouldn't make sense, because
They only
actually...
have one representative from the school.
Yeah, so it wouldn't be by house, so really, yeah.
They do change the rules, though, because Harry's name was in there.
True.
Because
Well, if he got it in there...
Birdie Jr. put his name in.
Oh, boy. What a little devil.
I know.
Yeah. Anyway...
Yeah, we are way off.
Yeah.
But that's okay. We're talking about Harry
we gotta
Potter.
move away from the...
I'm enjoying this more.
The English countryside and blast off into outer space or into darkness.
Well put.
Hey, someone's got to steer the ship.
Apparently not. Apparently it can just go.
Yeah.
I was going to say, that's why they made Autopilot.
So, this film, which may or may not be divisive, surrounds the crew of the Enterprise as they find themselves in an unstoppable force of terror from within their own organization, as Captain Kirk leads a manhunt to a war zone world to capture a one-man weapon of mass destruction.
Wait, they find themselves in an unstoppable force of terror?
Yes.
That's literally how... May I see? I'm not saying that you misread it. I just need to see it with my own eyes that they literally...
They find an unstoppable force of terror.
Ah, okay.
I misread it.
All right,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
No.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past them to
No.
write that. They find an unstoppable force of terror. Who stars in this film?
So I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
Because this film has returning characters from the first Star Trek film, which came out in 2009, first of this era at least.
Yep.
I give it points for that.
What's that?
For bringing characters back from that first movie.
Yeah.
Oof, that's some
What makes you say that?
That's some high level
That
shade
was
right
a
there.
joke.
Yeah,
Oh.
that's some high level shade. It's like I give them credit for bringing back those actors from the first film because that's some sophisticated shade against the first film. Nick.
Against the first film?
Yeah.
No, against the second film?
Ah.
Like, as if the goodwill it would garner would be established with doing the bare minimum?
Yeah.
Why are you agreeing? You just you just
I thought
the exact opposite.
I'm sorry. I thought you were just throwing shade on the first film and thought it was very clever.
No, anyway.
Oh, okay.
Please continue, Alan.
So Chris Pine returns as Captain Kirk, and also Zachary Quinto reprises his role as Spock. Also, Zoe Saldana and Carl Urban return, along with John Cho, Anton Yelchin, Bruce Greenwood, and Simon Pegg.
And who's the special guest star?
I haven't gotten there yet, but if you give me a chance, I might be able to get there.
Yeah.
So the film brings on a couple new characters, including Benedict Cumberbatch, who may or may not be playing Kahn in this film. Also,
Maybe.
yeah. Also, this has an appearance by Peter Weller, who famously played RoboCop.
Yep.
And also, too, we have a couple other people showing up here whose careers didn't really take off like they hoped they would, including Alice Eve, who was kind of
Eye candy.
a little, well, yeah, but she, in terms of, like, she was in things around this time, so she was having some sort of an impact in Hollywood. And she appeared here to have a scene where she's in her underwear, and that's basically it.
Yep. That was literally just a trailer shot. And then they just wove that into the film itself, and that's pretty much the peak of her character, just being ogled, and yeah, that's really unfortunate. Damn.
Anyways, also, JJ Abrams returned and directed this film after directing the first Star Trek, and then proceeded to immediately leave this crew and go and do Star Wars Force Awakens.
Bet he did.
I gotta say,
That's what he really wanted to do. He didn't give a shit about Star Trek. This is all just an elaborate ploy in order to get to Star Wars.
When he did the first Star Trek, I really don't know how he could have thought that this was like a, you know, I don't think that he's like, boy, I need to make the Star Trek so I can get that Star Wars project.
Yeah, that's a big, long con. I'm with you in this. I genuinely think there was a lot of goodwill and faith put into that first movie as far as his intentions of in the director's seat. Definitely, I feel like this one he was kind of in before he could get out type.
Well,
They
and
closed the blast doors.
As you have mentioned before, Nick, when discussing JJ Abrams, you have the feeling, and this isn't necessarily off base at all, I don't think, that JJ Abrams is really good at starting franchises and is not good at continuing them / finishing them.
Yeah.
He leaves other people and trusts them to finish it.
Well, but that's why he was good at television, because
Yeah.
that's how you do television. You know, you make a pilot, and then you get a showrunner. And if you don't want to be the showrunner, then that's valid. Like that's a commitment that's different than just being the a person who directed and whatnot. And yet, for Hollywood, that's a much different thing because it's just the budget is too much for that kind of a thing, and the wait between projects and whatever output is, it just can't. It's just not built for that kind of JJ model.
Yeah. I will say, though, he did make the first new Star Wars got out, and it appeared that although I think he was an executive producer in the last film and probably would have been on the third, it seemed as though he was out, and then they were desperate for the most part, I think, and then brought him back just because they wanted somebody with a name who was familiar with the series.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
there you go. Just the third film in the last 5 years that they've lost a director on midway through, so it's going great.
It's great. It's going great.
Although I will say,
who's the third? I can
well,
think
they fired Josh Trank,
right,
Yep.
and then they got rid of Lord Miller,
Yep.
and then they fired Colin Trevorrow.
Yep.
Oh, I was thinking Josh Trank and Colin Trevorrow were the same person.
No,
Like genuinely at that moment.
Damn.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, that makes sense.
their work is so subpar that it just sort of like blurs into one another. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on with Josh Trank and his circle of associates. We're
Well,
not
according
going.
to him, that's not in his circle.
Oh, he's got his own. He's got his own trouble. He's got his own
Well,
history and stuff.
Josh Trank?
Josh Trank, yeah.
I
guess
don't
'cause then-
believe there's anything out there that I'm aware of.
I
Not,
mean,
not that I really need
Nothing
to go
on
off
nothing
of
on
this,
par
but
with that of like his associate, but
well, can you please enlighten the class? Because I genuinely don't know.
Well, I'm talking about Max Landis, sort of making an oblique reference to Max Landis and the recent allegations made against him with regards to both sexual and emotional abuse, a history of
Right.
storied sexual and emotional abuse. And then I'm talking sort of about Josh Trank, not in the same extreme as that, but also the stories of like his temperament and inability to direct, basically, with regards to Fantastic Four.
Well, that's, I mean, kind of a different.
I know that's a different
thing.
extreme, but like literally when you hear stories about him like getting into shouting matches and about to like fist fight Miles Turner, like Miles Teller, is that? Miles Teller,
Turner.
the main
basketball player from the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah, basically the main character for his
Beat the
actual
shit
film,
out of him.
And him like losing a high profile
I mean,
thing out of that. I was like, I don't think that those are on the same par, but I'm saying that he's not without his own like level of controversy associated with
I mean,
That's
everybody says
completely
that David
fair.
Fincher's an asshole too, and yet
I mean, I would believe it.
most people think he's a great director.
I mean, it's possible to be both.
Right. Josh Trank, we've talked about him a few times on the podcast previously. He's had a rough go of it recently. Fantastic Four didn't work out, and got kicked out of Star Wars.
Yep.
And now he's doing this project with Tom Hardy about Al Capone that looks like an absolute disaster. But he did have some very strong words, I would say, regarding Max Landis.
Yeah,
Came
he said that he hadn't associated with him in like years, and
Which
that was part of the reason why Chronicle, which is a movie
Yeah.
that I actually really enjoy.
I was going to say, if anybody doesn't know, Josh Trank directed Chronicle.
That was
Max Landis was one of the screenwriters.
Yeah,
for it.
that was actually his. I think that might have been both of their first projects. Maybe Max Landis had worked on some other stuff. I'm not really aware of that, but I think that might have been actually what introduced both of them into the actual industry as working professionals. Yeah, the whole thing with Max Landis is part of the reason, apparently, why Chronicle never got a sequel, even though that film was relatively well received when it came out.
Well, I didn't realize until this past 24 or 48 hour news cycle that anyone wanted a sequel to Chronicle. I say that as someone who loves that movie.
Yeah.
But I can't.
I'm saying that it was.
No, I know, and I read, and then I saw that was like
a return.
Yeah, no, and I saw that there were plans and everything, and I'm like, but I just didn't know about that, and so it just blows my mind that anyone would think that was a good idea to begin with. But
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
After the fact, it probably sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Sure.
It was it was at the time, in my opinion, the best Akira adaptation that was not explicitly Akira. I think it understood the character, basically the dynamic between the antagonist and the protagonist is essentially the same as that of Kaneda and Tetsuo from Akira, and was even cited as a principal inspiration for that. And so, at least I can respect from the fact that at least I wish I hope that something on par of a level of sophistication and understanding is evident in Taika Waititi's eventual Akira adaptation compared to that of Chronicle. Because if Chronicle can do it, maybe they could do it too. So we'll see.
That's a positive outlook.
I'm really, really, really tempering my expectations because
I thought you were going to say I'm really, really pessimistic.
No, I mean I am pessimistic and I'm tempering my expectations because you know what? I love Akira. I love Akira almost as much as I love Ghost in the Shell. If not, it's pretty much neck and neck between the two.
But you loved that one, so.
Oh no, I hated that fucking film.
Thanks for going with me, bud.
I've literally buried that in my memory. But yeah. Anyway, let's switch gears and go back into darkness.
Thank you for turning the ship, Captain.
I'm going to derail this conversation as many times as possible just so we can get Toussaint to just course correct this.
Don't encourage him.
Oh, come on. Do that.
I wouldn't know.
Urge. So, usually I would start off since I am interested in this and I'm the one who brought us here. However, even though he doesn't have many opinions about this particular film, I'm going to ask Nick to start us off, mostly because I'm interested to hear your overall opinions on Star Trek. As is usually the case, out of everybody on this podcast, you have the most formed opinion on something we're talking about. And Star Trek is a property that has spanned decades and, almost a half of
since the
a
60s,
century. or over half a century.
50 years.
It has had many different iterations, and also had many different stars, from William Shatner, to Picard,
Captain Janeway.
Yeah. Scott Bakula.
Yeah, and then you have all of the new films that have come out and all the new television series that are planned. And now you've got Quentin Tarantino talking about wanting to do a Star Trek film, and there's a new series with Patrick Stewart playing Picard. So it's just it's a
franchise you can really cling on to.
But I will say, it is a series, unlike anything that Disney's doing right now with Marvel or Star Wars, that authentically feels like all of these different things are kind of their own thing, instead of trying to have everything is connected in this lineage, even though Tucson was mentioning something about the Picard thing maybe being related to the movies.
Well,
but
that's what I had heard, that it was set after the destruction of the Vulcan home planet. Yeah.
Which, I'll say that up front, which is that's always been Star Trek's thing, in that it is only as connected as you want it to be. Like, it is for the Star Trek nerds, you can draw the lines between the chronology and whatnot. But if you don't even have a passing knowledge, as you can watch The Next Generation and the original series side by side and not even really quite get it. And why they're connected, I mean, if you watch every episode, then and you didn't get it, that would be weird. But I'm saying if you don't get it or don't know it, they work as individual entities. I'm a Star Trek fan. I wouldn't say I grew up with it, but I definitely grew up with it on the television. My dad used to watch The Next Generation on TNT like every morning and night, and so now me and him are actually watching The Next Generation together, and in order and all that, which is fun for him because he just watched it, just rerun and whatnot. And so he, like, some of the cliffhangers have actual resolutions, and he's like, oh, I didn't realize, this bled into that and whatnot. So that's a lot of fun. I'm a Star Trek fan. I pretty much definitely, while it's reductive to say this, I mean, I've always thought, and I know I'm not the only one who said this.
Go for it.
But that, Star Wars is for people who like epics, and Star Trek is for people who like characters.
And we're just talking about the principal television like visual text that people like.
Yeah.
And
I'm just talking about the broadest of strokes,
not the extended universe, because those always for these two properties, their extended universes go into some really naughty and interesting and bizarre sort of like corners. We're talking about like the core actual like text.
The AV text only, as far as no comic, no games, no anything like that. I've always enjoyed The Next Generation at the television series. It's definitely one of the formative television series of all time, and I've seen a sampling of other series, and I've definitely watched quite a few of the original series, and I have no intention to ever watch every episode of it. But one thing it's interesting, before I even get into darkness, is that when it comes to the movies and television, I mean, I've always thought, not just because that's where it started, but because that's its ethos in general, that Star Trek is a television show, even when it's on the big screen. It has a fondness for a shared continuity, not even necessarily a shared universe, but just a look to the future type optimism and just structure in its overall purpose, that it's always felt like something trekking forward, so to speak. And ironically, though, when it comes to, like, let's just take the two pinnacle series of the original and Next Generation, I prefer the original series movies more than I prefer just about any episode of the original series.
What's your favorite original series movie?
Well, it's kind of a weird one because
everybody gravitates towards Wrath of Kahn.
I mean, that is probably the most accomplished out of them all. But honestly, my favorite one is the one that most people cite as one of the stupidest, because that's just who I am.
It's the one with the space whales?
No, that's a great one.
Okay.
A lot of people actually like that one. That was the the voyage home where they crash land. Well, not crash land. They have to go to San Francisco during the 70s or the 80s. And it's a very much of a fish-out-of-water comedy that just happens to star the Star Trek crew. And it actually works. Like, I thought I was going to hate it, but it's actually really good. But no, there's one, I think it's number 5 or 6, but there's one that's, I believe, I'm going to look up the title, but it's basically the Star Trek crew go looking for God. They genuinely, hold on one second. Because I want to make sure that I cite the right movie here. The Final Frontier, Star Trek V. That's why it's the Final Frontier, because they're looking for God. That one is so nutty. It's so weird. And what's up?
Just gotta look in their heart, man.
Oh, absolutely. And let me tell you something.
Do they actually shrink the Enterprise down and like go into their actual bodies and look in their heart?
No, they do not. They go to the planet where they start talking to God. And whether it ends up being God, you can watch the movie and find out for yourself.
I bet it's not.
But I don't know, that movie, I just remember that movie having so many great set pieces of fun and chicanery between the three.
No drugs were taken by any of the writers.
Absolutely not. No, I believe that one was directed by William Shatner, so that explains a lot. So anyway, that's my favorite, but I pretty much would also concede that The Wrath of Khan is definitely like the best of them and whatnot, if not my second favorite. So let's bring ourselves up to speed here to this new iteration, which is the first time in Star Trek history where a property has been a new property reinventing and reinterpreting existing characters. So I'll say this. Whether this movie is bad or good, that's got to admit that's the least interesting idea I think you could do with a Star Trek, even if I understand why you have to do it, because at this point, who's going to watch a Star Trek movie that doesn't have characters that we don't already know by at least name? And I say who as not meaning like me or other Star Trek fans, but just in general, like why would audiences show up when you have X-Files movies bombing at the box office in the 90s, we pretty much learned our lesson that TV does not just translate to screen, although apparently it does because we're also getting a Downton Abbey movie, so who knows. So while I do think that this timeline, so to speak, is definitely uninspired in general, I'll get some positives out of the way, which is that as a whole, I do love the casting of this reimagining of this crew, and I actually do appreciate JJ Abrams' willingness, even if it may have been studio mandated, to modernize the action aesthetics of Star Trek. I just don't care for the emphasis on it, and I feel like that's where Into Darkness really starts to lose me, which is that there are a lot of set pieces where, it's famous for a reason and for bad and good reasons, but yeah, Star Trek is the show when, when the ship was in danger, the actors just flailed around on the set to make it look like it was shaking. And you know what? I don't know that we need much more of that, and yet in this series, and I think this is like the apex of that. Like, this ship is just fucking sent through the ringer, and we have whole stretches of time in which we're just watching them run through, just architecture crumbling and
just running.
Yeah, and
like
while I do appreciate it in flashes, like I do love the brief sequence of Scotty and Kirk running through as the ship is turning to the point where they're now running on the wall. But most of it is just CGI destruction and not particularly interesting to me. And at the end of the day, they take and they repurpose so many fascinating Star Trek lore, whether it be Kahn himself or the Tribbles and whatnot, and none of it ends up really mattering or meaning anything.
Oh, look, there's a reference.
Yeah, and that's kind of what it feels like. And even when and I think the movie itself is trying very hard not to show its hand that it has no reason for bringing any of this into the fold. For example, the call between the two Spocks when we have to cut away from what future Spock would tell young Spock, because I don't think that they wanted to just admit that he would just sit there and go, well, yeah, when I was that Spock, this is what Kahn did. He killed me. Well, I killed myself, actually. Like, that's just such a boring conversation, and yet this movie says that conversation had to have happened, and somehow that's the only way they can write themselves out of how do you, to seal up this narrative. And when I say this narrative, I mean just this movie is not the overall narrative.
Feels like them writing or reviving a Deus Ex Machina from a previous... Well, I mean, it wasn't a Deus Ex Machina because that was pertinent to the actual plot of that first film.
Yeah.
Where like, there was a reason why Nimoy Spock was in the timeline that he was, and it was directly related to the antagonist of that film. It just seems like now they've sort of, like, regenerated him out of cryostasis. They just, like... They just shocked his body to life, like, tell me about Kahn!
Yeah.
No.
What?
I'm not saying that exactly. It's like it just feels like they're just resurrecting a character and bringing him back.
He's like
I know he's not dead.
Elders of the Vulcan group that's going to rebuild their home, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, he is technically still in this timeline.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
But yes, in the first film, sorry to cut you off, Nick.
Oh, no.
In the first film, Leonard Nimoy's character has a real purpose.
Yeah.
And here they just wanted to
He's
force
just part of the exposition.
that 81-year-old man into the film somehow, and we need to find some way, and he can't move anymore, so we're just going to stick a video screen on him.
And I would also say that it's kind of what I was saying earlier, is that they wanted to bring or to do Kahn over again, and by the time they were getting to the last act and I think tired of writing the screenplay, they're like, well, we will just make sure that Spock asks Spock what happens in the rest of the script so he knows what to do. Like, that's kind of what it feels like to me. A few other things that I just don't really care for in this movie is that it didn't strike me until rewatching it that the reason why this movie feels off, because I just kind of forgot about it, just as far as plot-wise, is that, they don't get to actually be the crew that they are and to set out on their purpose until the end of the movie. Like, that is when they start their 5-year voyage, and I kind of forgot about that. So while the movie makes more sense in retrospective, because I was like, why are they even doing this shit, when I was just thinking back on it, it also just makes less sense as just the purpose of watching it for myself, because Star Trek is not hunting down a person to kill them, except not to kill them. Although the only reason they don't kill them is because they need him to save the captain, which was
Originally they were sent to
well, I know,
they were
first
sent to detain him. Wink, wink. Like they're like SEAL Team 6 is sent to detain Osama bin Laden. Wink, wink.
Yeah. It is it's nothing about this feels like they are on a ship on the quote-unquote final frontier, going from planet to planet, enacting diplomacy. I mean, for me...
No, this isn't about diplomacy.
Right,
this is about killing people.
Star Trek has always been about coexistence, not resistance. And for the movie to go so far into, let's have a baddie just blow shit up, and let's have our characters follow him around... It just doesn't need to be called Star Trek. Make another space movie, and it's just boring to me because there's so many possibilities and there's so many good ways to do that. Because while Kirk, speaking as the William Shatner version, while Kirk is a kind of renegade action wannabe hero, most of that's all talk. Like, so to let Chris Pine, who I think does it ably, but to let him truly be a swashbuckler, it's just kind of, that's the most boring version of Star Trek I can think of. Whereas in this next movie in this series, in my opinion, I think it apropos that movie actually opens up with a captain's log, and we see a montage of crew living and whatnot, because those things were essential even to the original series, which was much more action oriented than the following series. But that movie showed them landing on a planet, finding a hostile alien force, trying to figure out what their place is on that planet, but also in the context of the universe at whole, figuring out the best solution and leaving and getting the fuck out of there before they fuck things up.
Yeah, that's a Star Trek episode.
Exactly.
As I would understand
and
it.
the closest we get to that in this movie is the opening 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And
where they're already mid-mission or they're closing out a mission.
yeah, and so here's what I'll say before I pass it off. If what followed that opening 10 minutes wasn't just repurposing every little Star Trek signifier and icon that Star Trek fans love so much, if it wasn't so in your face about, like, look, we're Star Trek, we're Star Trek, we're Star Trek, I don't know that I'd be as annoyed by this movie, but because it just does that at every whatever, and then also fails at being what it is supposed to be, it all washes out. And I don't think this is like the worst movie ever made or anything like that, but I definitely feel that it's a pointless one.
You don't know why it exists.
Yeah, so that's what I'll say for now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I am a big fan of the first two films in the series, and I'm definitely interested in revisiting Star Trek Beyond, as it for sure is my least favorite of the three new era Star Trek films that have been made. I absolutely love the first Star Trek film. It's in my top 50 all time. It is a knocking on the door of masterpiece, in my opinion. It is a fantastically made film that is an origin story. It also involves time travel and planets exploding from the inside, and Eric Bana's there, and he has a boat, and it's
Just the Bana boat.
I know there's just a lot happening there, and it all weaves together in a pretty delightful way, in my opinion. Now, this film I am a fan of as well, and I think mostly I'm a fan of it because of a lot of the things that you are saying, Nick, that you didn't like about it. And I think a big reason why is because I am not someone who comes from being a Star Trek fan. I was just a person who caught on to the marketing from the Chris Pine film in 2009 and said, oh, I want to go see this. I know almost nothing about Star Trek. I know what little of it I saw. I maybe watched 7 or 8 episodes when I was younger on TV randomly.
But there was enough in that initial first film where you was like, I am familiar with these characters. I'm familiar with these archetypes. Like, I would like to see what this would. You're intrigued at least by, like, how those pieces could then be arranged into a contemporary sci-fi action film from JJ Abrams. There's just a lot of names and a lot of recognizable images that are attached to that would compel a person to be interested in it. And I'm half speaking from, like, speculating of what, like, elicited your interest, and half of what actually elicited my own interest when I saw that
Well,
film.
and the first film, I think, actually is one of the better uses of CGI, actually, in the last 20 years. I mean, it's probably up there with, something like Prometheus or The Martian.
Prometheus is a good-looking film.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of films that have done space CGI well. I actually think the new Star Wars films have been kind of mediocre on space.
I agree with that.
But they're not bad. But,
Yeah.
I think that's why they work, though, because the originals weren't, like, the biggest budgets and whatnot.
No, but they still looked a little more authentic.
Oh, absolutely.
Probably have something to do with, like, using, like, physical sets and props and
Well, the first time that
the novelty of those images for the first time too.
I will say this about the very first film in this series that was released in 2009. When the characters see the Enterprise for the first time, it should be like this incredible moment, and it feels like that when you're actually in the theater. Like the music, just the way that the ship looks, the way the light is hitting off of it. I'm making it sound like it's this great experience, but it should be. Like, it should be this, you're seeing the vehicle that is the only vehicle that truly matters in this entire series. And it is perfectly shown to the audience as is being shown to the characters in the film. And that is definitely something that, not just that aspect of it, but that sort of attention to those kind of details is what makes the first film as good as it is. And that is definitely kind of missing here in this one. That being said, as I mentioned, I really do like this film. I actually am very intrigued by Benedict Cumberbatch and his character of Kahn, because I think actually the idea of having him be this character creates a lot of positive and negative emotion from people, and I don't necessarily know if that's a good or bad thing, but I guess at least it was an attempt in a way. I mean, the idea of trying to disguise his character, having him be Kahn but not really be Kahn, and just kind of being like throwing that in there, I actually thought it was kind of interesting, and even if it was a total throwaway thing, and you guys could both just shake your heads.
Even David Lindelof, who wrote this, said that he fucked up.
I mean,
I'm just saying.
Yeah, but
I'm saying just in
yeah.
the marketing,
Yeah.
like, if it was going to be Connie, that should have just been straight from the beginning.
Right,
Not
right.
so much that the movie itself is whatever. But
Right.
there was no need for the mystery box that
No,
JJ Abrams loves.
I can understand that, and Damon Lindelof is an extraordinarily respected writer who's doing really fantastic work right now.
See, here's the thing. Yeah, I know you're gonna do the whole face, but I think that he
ran off Twitter because people hate his
I think that he is respected.
Okay.
He is. I'm not like clapping. I'm not clapping back. I'm just clarifying because we've already had conversations about Damon Lindelof on this very podcast and probably that he's been a part of. I don't need to talk about Prometheus. That seems like a meme where it just like keeps on coming back to haunt me every fucking day.
Yeah, you keep bringing it up.
I don't mean to. It's like it's related to this because he wrote that film. He also wrote a majority of Lost, I believe, and a lot of people both within the industry and outside of the industry respect him as much as he is reviled. I think that I didn't really come around to because I've never watched Lost. I've never really followed that show, and I think more of that. From what I gather from Nick, that's more of a show you have to experience in the time for which it was actually aired. I mean, you could still come back to it, but probably the optimum time to have watched it was while it was on the air when it was a water cooler show, per se. I don't think I've come around to Damon Lindelof until I watched The Leftovers, which I honestly believe is not only a great show, but probably one of the greatest shows of the past decade. I did not think that I would say that before I had watched it and I knew his name was attached to it, but goddamn, that show is great.
Which is kind of where I was going.
I know,
I feel like right now he's actually in a much better spot than he was when Star Trek Into Darkness came out.
Yeah, but I feel like those lingering criticisms from his previous work, either with Prometheus or even from this film, I think like those are still present in a lot of people's minds.
I will say you're right in the sense that it seems like his trajectory is course correcting
Right.
in a good way. However, I will also say that I know prominent TV critics who basically refuse to watch The Leftovers after the first 2 episodes because David Lindelof is a quote-unquote hack and whatnot.
Okay.
And I obviously disagree.
Well, it's their loss because that
he still holds a very special place in some people's hearts.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Continue.
I will say, for me personally, who's someone who does not hold near and dear the Star Trek storyline, specifically the Kahn storyline, I always thought that was kind of an interesting part of this film, which I'm pretty much in the minority there. But I will say, just throwing that little bit in there halfway through the film, again, I thought actually was pretty interesting because although it does evoke this super negative emotion for people who are fans, and I can completely understand that, it also does create this interesting dynamic with a character that you've already established throughout the first hour of the film, who you are now filling with all of your preconceived thoughts about what that character was on the previous show, and so it just there's this weird collision, and I don't know. There's just something about it that I actually quite enjoy, even if the delivery was thought of as bad. So anyways, that's my opinion on it. I actually think Benedict Cumberbatch is pretty good in this film, and I actually think he plays this villain pretty well. He has a very demonic voice, which is great because works really well in this. He's great in the second Lord of the Rings reboot film, which is the only one worth anything. The other two are dog shit.
I love his hair in this one. He looks like Jared Way.
He looks like something. That hair is really fake.
He was about to get me to join the Black Parade because
outside of Benedict Cumberbatch and Kahn, I thought that this is just overall just a fun action film that does have a really solid 20 minutes or so of some really good gaslighting that's happening throughout the middle of this film, where everything happening with Peter Weller and everything happening with Kahn and Chris Pine, and everyone's doubting each other and nobody knows who to trust, and it really does go on for a good 20 minutes, and it is pretty awesome.
I would say it's gaslighting. I would say it's more misdirection, like artful misdirection. But it's the first part is it was interesting to rewatch it because I was just remember. It's been so many years since watching the film in theaters. But yeah, I found myself at least moderately invested in the first part, and I'm just like, oh yeah, why the fuck did he blow up that thing? Chris Pine just explained why he did that, and then he exploded the whole thing.
Fun fact: when Star Trek Into Darkness was in theaters, it was Alex and I's. It was one of our first dates.
Aww.
Do you at least feel like this film's better than the first film we saw in the theater together?
The Hangover Part 3?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good.
And I actually liked this film more the second time around.
Oh.
Maybe because I'm bringing even more Star Trek affection this time around. So just in general, it raises my... I really don't have a problem with non-con stuff in this. I actually think the first 30 minutes... are fantastic. Not to go off on a tangent, but the Kirk Pike scene, Kirk Pike and then Spock in the beginning of that meeting, that, in my opinion, was wonderful, classic Star Trek of having these strong personalities clash on diplomacy and what is right and what is wrong and rules and whether they're important or not and whatnot. And there are some other moments scattered throughout that I also enjoy. But so I don't hate this movie. No. I mostly just went off because I knew we were probably going to go more positive, so then I just wanted to
I feel like this film just has a lot of really fun little set pieces. It does have fun battles throughout. I do think if I did have to give one big negative, and I will say that the Kahn storyline, although I enjoy its introduction into this film, I think it does have diminished returns throughout, at least before the climax of this. Everything after Kirk sacrifices himself for the rest of the crew.
That's a very tepid, shall we say, resolution afterwards. It's all they literally beam down to do an action scene, and then they just cut to black. Yeah. And then go epilogue.
And then we're putting everyone back in their tubes and doing what with them? We're probably never going to find out. Yeah.
Well, not to be fair, but that's kind of a winking setup as to what happened in the original Kahn storyline, which was that he was a frozen person, and then they found him on another planet. So the idea there is maybe they're not learning from their mistakes because to, shall we say, preserve such evil only makes it that much more likely that in 2,000 years or whatever, if someone were to accidentally, whatever. So anyway.
Yeah. So overall, those are probably my initial remarks. So, Tucson.
So, kind of following after Alex, I am also somebody who doesn't necessarily have a bespoken relationship when it comes to Star Trek. I was, as Nick was talking about before, I was more of a Star Wars kid. I was more into sort of the spectacle of sci-fi epics than I was for the political intrigue or the sort of rhetorical repartee between characters and stuff. And I think that, as I've gotten older, that I'm more interested in those sort of dynamics because I think that is very interesting. In particular, I'm reading Ian M. Banks's The Player of Games right now, and that's a very good book. And I would definitely recommend the culture books right now. That's just sort of a tangential aside, seeing as like the continuum of my interest in sci-fi. I've known about Star Trek. I've seen episodes of Star Trek before. I know the character archetypes, or at least I know the pop cultural perception of these archetypes rather than the actual like direct reading of the text itself. And so like I was able to come to the first Star Trek film, and I thought that was I haven't seen it in a while, but I remember it being okay. And this film for me is it's kind of tepid. I don't really like the cinematography. I think that it is very boring. I know that this is pretty much all, like, JJ Abrams is still playing in his wheelhouse. He's still got his toy box of Dutch angles and chase scenes and lens flare and shit. And it's balanced with, like, these oversaturated set pieces set against these, like, really dark and drab, like, other set pieces. Like, ooh, we're into darkness now. It just didn't really do it. Like, really, honestly, the cinematography and the actual, like filming of the film just didn't do anything for me. I can't think of a single memorable like scene, set piece, or sequence that really like wowed me. I was like, I remember it, but I'm just like, yeah, that happened. That was the thing. I'll go, yeah, they flew through space and they were following along the little trajectory line on their helmets and stuff. It just felt like a Fast and Furious film. It was just kind of like that Fast and Furious film where they like drop their cars out of the...
Which is ironic because the next installment was directed by an actual Fast and Furious Helmer.
Yeah. I guess they
That's a word.
They focus tested that, and he was like, more of that. Okay, why don't we just get the guy who knows how to fucking do that then?
But he also then pulled up on those brakes because, like I said, that one I would say good or bad, but that's less action-oriented. Like, when the action is present, it is a lot more choreographed, I think, as far as, like, hand-to-hand combat and whatnot. But that is, I would say, few and far between. In a movie... Whoa.
Whoa there.
In a movie like Star Trek Into Darkness.
Yeah. With regards to like the acting and the characters and stuff, like I know I'm familiar with these characters. I know tangentially enough about Kahn and about Kirk and about Spock and about Uhura and about Bones and all the other characters and stuff, where I'm able to like sort of like piece together and gel that understanding into sort of recognize like, oh, I recognize that one line, oh, I recognize that one scene that they're sort of hearkening to, but it just doesn't really do anything for me. It just feels like, even having not had that as direct of an experience when it comes to Star Trek, these scenes that a lot of them are doing, especially with like Benedict Cumberbatch being like, my name is Kahn, and then they just linger for a little bit, and then they cut back to the like Kirk actually looking at him and be like, he's just kind of like stone faced, and I'm just like, that whole lull was for us for the audience to go.
It's a weird delivery because
it's a weird delivery.
I was gonna say because these characters don't know who Kahn is.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like they're
like, it's filmed with portent, but they don't know who the fuck this guy is.
But
the audience does.
And I forgot to tell you about Live Aid.
Oh God! Why didn't you tell me about Live Aid?
Yeah, because if you look back at the Wrath of Khan, what made that a blockbuster in its own right was because they took a character who was only in one episode of the original series, and the end of that episode, because they basically find this Khan, and he's a leader of his people, and he's very pissed off, and somewhat rightfully so, but also way too much so, and so he tries to take control of the Enterprise.
Rightfully pissed, but also a little too much.
Yeah, and he just tries to do that whole barbarian shit and just like claim whatever he thinks is his, blah blah blah.
He's the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah. And that episode ends with Kirk and the crew, but basically saying, okay, we're going to leave you on this planet with you and your people. We're not going to, like, kill you or anything. And, you know, you have, like, an opportunity to start anew. So this is really a humane thing. And then, phew, zipping off. So when, in the second movie, when they get that VidCon call from him, it truly was a fucking... I mean, I know... wasn't a shock twist as far as like he's in this movie or whatever, but that reparations were going to be made for their past actions, however justified they were in their head, and that he was showing up to basically even more angry than he was in the first place for good reason.
He's here to slaughter them.
Yeah, and that made sense, and that was something they have to actually deal with. Whereas here, and they don't know who Kahn is in that context, and I guess not only do they not know, but continuity itself has changed ever since the first installment in this series.
I just want to, like, a brief aside, like, when you're talking
Yes.
about Kahn and how, like, he was angry but a little bit too much, I'm reminded of, very short aside, there's a new trailer for the new Legend of Zelda game, and somebody made a meme of, like, the shot of the corpse, and it's breaking news, man so angry he can't die. So I just thought of, like, Kahn is like, he's too angry to die.
Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah.
And so, in this movie, they're chasing a villain that hasn't yet,
Established himself
Yeah.
with any sort of reputation whatsoever.
and that's where, to me, it ultimately feels hollow. And I'll say one more thing about the climax of this movie with the sacrifice. So that is a weird scene for me because of two things, which is...
I recognize it. Just that's another moment where it just came off as derivative. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sorry to-
No. So it is, for anyone who hasn't seen The Wrath of Khan, it is an inversion of that movie in which, at the end of The Wrath of Khan, Spock locks himself in a chamber where he has to die. I don't remember the sci-fi mumbo-jumbo, but it's the exact opposite. Hands on the glass, everything that happens, and of course William Shatner ends up screaming Khan because he fucking created all this, whatever. In that movie, everything makes sense. Spock basically saying, listen, I don't have emotions, so I'm just going to fucking lock myself in here because that's the logical thing to do, and don't cry for me, Argentina. And
What? Nice Evita reference.
and
What?
and yeah, it's from the musical.
Okay.
Anyway, and Kirk putting his hand up on the glass only for Spock to actually meet it, because that is like the furthest he can go with regards to emotion. It's a gorgeous scene because even Shatner at the moment is not overplaying it until he gets to his scream, and it just makes sense and it's great. And yes, even when Shatner overacts and shouts Khan, like, that's why you have Shatner, and it's great, whatever. Here, we flip the roles, and then things start breaking down because Spock would never cry. Like, I'm not saying he can never shed a tear, and I'm not saying he's not part human. I get that, and sure, I'm sure someone will probably be on their keyboard saying, well, in episode 4 of season 3, he did whatever. I don't give a fuck. In general, these characters literally cease to exist as we know them for the sake of an Easter egg inversion twist.
Yeah.
And not only that, but when he died in the second movie, there was no plan for a third movie. Or if not planned, there was no guarantee of a third movie. So they killed him off. They did not revive him by the end of the movie. That's why the third movie is called The Search for Spock, because he's still dead, and they're still trying to find a way to bring him back.
Oh, they're trying to find God to bring Spock back.
No, The Search for Spock is a completely different movie.
Okay.
And when we, in this movie, for him to make that sacrifice, only for 5 minutes later for a blood transfusion to save his life, if anything, Spock would be the one who would be able to fucking figure that out. But no, he has to cry instead. And I don't know, it's just nothing about that scene works, especially not Zachary Quinto having to scream Khan and actually... I don't know, face humanity the day after he shot that and for the rest of his life. So it's just a dumb trend in this current state of remakes and adaptations where no thought is put into what were the original emotions and mechanism that created these organic situations before, because we don't need to, because people will go see it. And you know what? There will be people who will sit in the theater seat and say,
I remember that scene, but
Yeah.
it's different.
Exactly. So, thank you. All right, so that's my end of the Kahn rant, which I know I'm not the only one who thinks that, and I know there are other people who don't give a shit, but I just had to give voice to that.
Yeah. That's fine.
I feel like that's a valid stance. I mean, that's kind of where I align on with regards to that. So,
But outside of Kahn, I don't hate this movie. I really like the the meeting of the council.
Oh, the war room?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That whole thing with, I do like that's a great shading of Kirk's character, which is a very short-sighted person, and that's why he's the only one who's really actually trying to figure out what's happening now. It's both what makes him a great, captain, because he can think under pressure, but also sometimes a short-sighted one, because he can't think of long-term ramification. But for him to deduce what may happen to the red just over-flooding the room, the red light, before the attack happens.
Yeah.
I just think that's a very nicely staged sequence.
What I like actually a lot about that particular scene, I mean, there's a lot happening in that scene. It's actually really good, I think, but you have Bruce Greenwood dying, you have the whole thing with Spock, and there was that really terrible subplot with him and Uhura throughout this film, and she's just completely wasted here, which I think is fine, but this idea of them having this fight because of him not being able to show his emotions, which she should have known that.
Yeah, it's a weird fight. It's like, on the one hand, I kind of admire it because that's a couple.
Yeah.
You do the same shit over and over, you're going to fight about it over and over. On the other hand, I just feel like the writing for it wasn't on par because it was less like she does talk like she doesn't know him, whereas it should have been like, no, I know you're an asshole. That's why I'm upset. And sometimes it felt like it was the opposite. Like, why don't you feel? Anyway.
So what I do love most about that is this is the third time I've watched this film in its entirety, and if I just keep forgetting about it, that probably means it's not that good, but I still do like it. So I don't know, but this idea of watching it and just thinking, how does he escape from this? And I'm like, oh yeah, he just does that. That's fine. I mean, is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. I kind of dig it because I like the idea of him just obviously having a plan and thinking way ahead of everybody else, and everything surrounding that is just basically inconsequential. So,
yeah. I'd agree.
Okay. So I'm reading the room, and it seems like there's not much more to be said about this film.
Yeah, I really don't have any more energy to spend on this film. I mean, it's.
I'll say a couple things.
Yeah. I can keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, I feel like a lot of the action sequence in this film I actually do quite enjoy. Toussaint was mentioning that he didn't really care very much for the cinematography, and I could understand that. But I do actually appreciate a lot of the shooting scenes, a lot of the combat scenes.
I mean, when Kahn was going into Super Soldier 76 mode and just, like, capping every Klingon in sight and, like, I don't know, shooting a giant, like, Klingon warship out of the sky. And...
No, I mean, that is obviously part of the film,
Yeah.
but at the same time, the kind of aggressive battle scenes that he has throughout there, I mean, I feel like a lot of the combat is really short, and it almost just happens so quickly that you almost forget about it. But at the same time, I actually think that is what I actually like about it in this film, because you show Kahn as almost this unstoppable force throughout here, which obviously he, for the most part, is. And I actually appreciate that throughout, because a lot of films have these long, drawn-out battle sequences, and they're it can be really good. I mean, obviously, the first Raid and the second Raid film have great battle sequences. We've seen the John Wick films. These films were known for that. But here, this idea of these long, drawn-out, hand-to-hand battle sequences are really just sort of not needed. And you still can have awesome fight moments with them being very short. And that's something I actually appreciate about this film, because I think the action involved here is actually really not, like, screen time wise, a very major part of the film. But it also delivers with purpose, I think. So that is one thing I appreciate. And another thing that I actually really like about this film is actually Chris Pine's performance, which is kind of a little bit random, because I thought in the first film he was just okay, but I thought here he actually is interesting as a character, because he is this captain, and I feel like the storyline with him being kind of like he was in the first movie, where he's this one who doesn't really care for the rules and whatever, is kind of there at the very beginning of the film, but he kind of grows out of that very quickly and gets pretty much named first officer, which obviously then he just becomes the captain again because the captain is killed 3 seconds later.
I'm the captain again.
Oh man, that'd be all. I'm the captain now. He just kills him, and that's the whole thing. He just disguises as that. But he actually, Chris Pine, that is, I've always thought was a very mediocre actor. But I thought in this particular film, out of the three, he actually delivers a decent performance, as I actually believe a lot of what's happening with his character as he is moving all these other characters throughout the film. I mean, the scene with him arguing with Scotty, the scene of him making up with Scotty, everything and he's doing a lot of this over conversations, not actually human interaction, which is bizarre. The scenes where he's trying to have this bizarre conversation with Anton Yelchin's character, who's being forced into this bullshit job that he's not trained for, and everything about that, I feel like Chris Pine actually gives off the aura of being an actual captain of a ship, and he actually delivers a good performance in film. So
I would actually go one step further, and I don't think you'll agree quite, but you might appreciate this, in that I actually think Chris Pine's performance gets better with each film. I genuinely think that he is basically completely and fully immersed in the role by the third film, and I definitely think he's in it as well in this movie. Like, I'm with you in that I think the first movie, it kind of worked because it was an origin story, so he's supposed to not really be all there yet. So while a better actor could have sold it better, at least it had a reason for that kind of neuroses or whatever. But in this movie, I'm with you. Like, from that first 30 minutes when he's fighting with Pike, whatever, that felt a lot like Kirk and what we would think of Kirk to be, to the point that by the time he starts his 5-year voyage at the end of this, I just think he's definitely gone. It's only when he has to do things that supersede Kirk as a character and are more plot, like his sacrifice, where he has to really emote, that I just kind of go, But in general, I think he is a worthy successor and a pretty uncanny casting choice to carry this particular the Kelvin timeline on.
Well, that's what it's called?
Yeah, it's what refers to the original.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I know. There's a lot of lore stuff that, there's no...
Doesn't matter, but...
There's a Star Trek fan that's just raging. It's like, the Kelvin timeline is very important because it's a reference to this one episode. I get it. I understand. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I don't care about the Star Trek mythology. I mean, my favorite episode of any Star Trek series is The Measure of a Man, where Data, played by Brent Spiner, the whole episode is just him basically in court where he has to prove that he has rights because he is a robot.
Oh.
And should that...
It's like the plot of Ted 2. Unfortunately, yes.
Oh my God, I cannot believe you...
Really?
You resurrected Ted 2.
What happened in Ted 2?
I can't remember.
He has his rights taken away, and he's on trial.
Because he's a teddy bear. Oh, I gotcha. Oh,
he's on trial to try to fight for his personhood.
Yeah, right, and that's on par with one of the best episodes of Star Trek.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I mean,
I know.
I forgot that was the plot, even though it totally is.
Literally what the plot of the film is.
Yeah. So, anyway. So, I'm way more into just the short story version of Star Trek than I am this faction and that faction are at war, and read the wiki to figure out why.
Right on. So, going on to final ratings, I'm a fan of this. I gave this 3.5 out of 5. I just think it's an enjoyable action film that has some fun twists and turns, and as I am not really aware of much about the original Star Trek series or the Next Generation or any other things surrounding Star Trek outside of the films that have been released in the 2000s, I enjoy all of these three films, and even though I've liked them less as they've gone on, I still thought this was an enjoyable film, a solid action movie, and also just a film that I can sit down and watch for 2 hours and enjoy. So 3.5 out of 5 for me for Star Trek Into Darkness.
I'm not really a fan of this movie. I'm a fan of Star Trek in general, so I probably give it a higher rating than I think I would at first glance. There's a lot of parts of this that I like, and I think there's a lot of elements that work, and that's what makes this so far trilogy work as a whole. But because the meat of the movie is the Kahn dynamic, I just don't ever see myself wanting to rewatch this if I have the option to watch The Wrath of Khan, because this doesn't offer anything to it, and in my opinion denigrates some of the best parts of the original narrative. If this had gone in a different direction and actually twisted things, not just inverted things for fun's sake, then I wouldn't, like, I'm not a quote unquote, I'm a purist, like, it said it, they do it this way, it's got to be done that way. But if you're not going to actually
antithetical to the spirit of Star Trek.
Wow. If you're not if you're not going to truly lean into redefining these characters and actually playing with the dynamics, because you can't do a moment like what I had mentioned earlier with the Kahn reversal, where Spock is sobbing, and if you just set that Spock up in the previous film and a half before it as the same Spock as before, So I'm all about reinventing the wheel, but if you're not going to reinvent it, then stop changing other things that don't make sense along the way, and tell new stories instead, because otherwise it's just going to be kind of a pointless endeavor for me. So overall, I give it a 2 out of 5. I think as a blockbuster, it has a lot of fun moments, and obviously these are characters and a universe that I find endearing. But if this is all that Star Trek would or was, I would not be a fan of Star Trek. Let's put it that way. So 2 out of 5 for me.
Right on.
Yeah, this is a 2 out of 5 for me as well. I think that it's visually interesting enough to like put on in the background and to like glance at it every once in a while. I think that the baseline plot is simple enough to like follow. It's like it's surprising at times. Like I found myself like, oh yeah, I was like, wait, how do they do that? And then I remembered like, oh, it was like the last time I watched it, I was like, oh, there's 72 people in those pods, and like that's why Kahn doesn't want them to be like fired off, and then he's gonna take over the evil ship that Peter Weller did, and he's gonna perform mass genocide because he's a genetic like supremacist or some shit like that. Yeah, that's interesting enough. I thought that there is one scene that I thought was cool. There was one scene that I thought was cool, and that was just sort of the
Alice Eve scene.
Huh? No, I didn't. I don't care about that.
That's real nice too.
It was the scene where they jumped into hyperspace in order to escape Peter Weller's ship.
Oh, yeah.
And then they explain it's like, no, he's been doing some crazy shit with his ship. You don't understand. You're gonna get your shit blown up. And then it's like, and then it just comes out of him just like, surprise! You thought you forgot about me, didn't you, asshole? And then it just like shoots him out, and then all those people die on the ship. Where like at the beginning of the film, like
getting knocked out of warp, warp, and then just like
and then just getting your shit blasted to pieces. Yeah. I'm just like, and then to pause, and then like Kahn does his whole like coup d'etat thing, and then proceeds to then shoot the shit out of the Enterprise again.
I'll say this real quickly. I have a bit of a problem with the geography here. And this is getting kind of weird and nerdy, which actually is very interesting that I'm complaining about it.
Yeah, outer spatial like
so
orientation.
They get knocked out of warp twice throughout this film, and there's no indication that they are going to be going out of warp anytime soon when it happens both times, and yet they somehow are right by their destination. So that's bizarre.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it?
Like, they get knocked out of it, and they're like, oh, there's Earth. It's like, wait a minute.
Well, they're on the final frontier.
Okay.
Yeah. They haven't gone farther than the moon.
I have no idea.
Yeah. Very, very, very convenient. But, yeah, it's a 2 out of 5 for me. It's just okay.
Yep. Yeah. So, if you out there have any thoughts on this film or anything else Star Trek related, always feel free to send them on to us at filmtankshow@gmail.com, or try to find us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Film Tank Show. Also, You can find all of our episodes on our website, filmtankshow.com.
Literally all of them at the moment.
I know, pretty much, yeah. This has not happened very often, but
No.
here we are.
We are caught up.
We are caught up for the first time in like a year and a half, and we're going to stay caught up.
I
But actually this time.
think so.
Yep.
I'm ready to. Are you ready to? Look me in the eye.
I am.
Because I did it once before this year. Mm-hmm. And you burned me once. Fool me twice. And I will cut your fucking throat.
Oh, my God. Okay. Yeah. We'll keep up. We'll keep up with these episodes.
Will we?
Yeah.
Just kidding.
It'll be great.
You can find our episodes also. Is iTunes or is it, what's it called now? Is it officially closed?
Call
It's
it Apple Podcasts.
Apple Podcasts,
Yeah.
or Stitcher. And if you want to find us on there and rate and review our episodes, that'd be great.
Apple Podcasts doesn't really like roll off the tongue as easily as iTunes
It doesn't, but just so that there's no confusion.
Yeah.
You know what's a little fun fact? A little behind the scenes. I have a cousin visiting. Well, I have two cousins. One just left, though. And when I had a hunch this would work, and it did, and I'm very happy. And this is Film Tank, so related, so that's why I feel comfortable sharing it.
It's just us and the microphones and all the people who listen to our episodes.
That's right. But he had asked me what the name of our podcast was and how he could find us, so I gave the spiel and whatnot. And then he goes, oh, well, I use, and he named whatever podcast feed aggregator he uses. And I'm like, you know what? I actually think it will show up because I have noticed that our podcast does show up on random third-party ones that I've never heard of, which I believe is because they pull from a master list, either from iTunes or Stitcher, and that's the only reason why that works. Anyway, it totally worked. He was like, oh, yeah, it's in that database. And I was like, cool. So if you have any podcast feed aggregator, give it a try under Film Tank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know, and
Just
not
a little
something I would have thought of.
Fun fact.
Yeah,
We're not
good.
going to say that every week, but
No.
just in case you never thought about that.
Just how you said it.
This is just
Just
extra,
like that.
extra
Yeah, we're just
special
going to take
episode.
that clip.
Just plop it right in.
Boom.
Yeah.
Beautiful. The magic of editing. Coming up on our next episode, we're going to go back in time and bring back doing a top 6 episode. Yeah. That goes wild. So this top 6 episode is actually going to be pretty cool because, as in the past, and there's nothing wrong with those episodes we've done, but they've been pretty simple in terms of the idea of what they are: top 6 favorite Disney animated film, top 6 villains, and
Revenge films.
Yeah.
Yep. I think
So-
those are the only 3 we've done outside of annuals.
that sounds right.
Yeah.
But they're pretty simple in terms of the criteria for it, and not that this really isn't, but at the same time, it also requires probably a little more thought, which on the surface maybe sounds like it wouldn't, but especially since I've taken time to think about it, it definitely does, and I think that's something that's going to make it a very fun episode, hopefully for the listener, and obviously I think for us as well. And that category is top 6 favorite film conversations. So the only thing I will say is that there was a pretty, I wouldn't say strict, but a pretty clear criteria that this had to be an actual conversation, and also, too, it should be between just 2 people. I mean, there can be other characters in the room.
Just the 2 of us.
And there could be other people that say something at some point, but this is a conversation that is happening between 2 characters. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, too, and this is something that actually when I started putting my list together, because I've started compiling some films as we've thought about this for the last week or so, I thought of a lot of conversations that happened that the more I thought about them and went back and actually rewatched a couple of them, they are just monologues with another character standing there listening.
I have been doing the same exact thing. I keep going, oh, that's a good one. And then I'm like, but the other person doesn't talk. So, yeah, no, it's which means we'll just have to do top 6 monologues one day.
Which could be fun, too.
But I think that's going to be easier, because that's clearly what's coming to mind, even when you're not thinking about
There's
it.
a storm coming.
No.
There's a storm coming. Yeah.
But, yes, no, top 6 conversations.
And it should be fun. And we should, I think, although there may be some crossover, I think, unlike previous top 6 episodes, there will definitely be some pretty original answers for this, and I think that'll be a lot of fun. So, looking forward to that coming up.
It's going to be a good conversation, I think.
Ah, you son of a bitch. It'll be just like the second episode we ever did.
Yeah.
The conversation.
That's right.
Oh, man.
Oh.
Although, another rule that I'm setting for myself, not that
No more puns.
Whatever. No. Fuck you. Is that I keep thinking of certain movies where I'm like, well, the whole movie, the conversation, because that's like my bread and butter. Like whether it's something literally like My Dinner with Andre or like the movie Tape, where there's just a room, so all they can do is talk to each other. So I am eliminating those. Like I'm myself am looking for conversations that are plucked in the middle of a movie that is not. That's the only thing it's got going for it. Anyway, it's just there's so many avenues here.
There is.
Anyway. It's fun.
So, looking forward to that coming up on episode 196. So, thank you very much to the listeners. And from Toussaint Egan, Nick Cheney, and myself, Alex Diekman, we will be catching up with you next time here on Film Tank.
Captain's Log, signing off.